Alfred Korzybski founded a system called General Semantics. A few of his proteges were very important in my own life. Dr. William Pemberton, who studied with Korzybski in the Korzybski seminars, and Dr. S.I. Don Hayakawa, professor at San Francisco State, later president of San Francisco State, and later United States Senator from California. Don Hayakawa, we called him Don, was a very important person in my life to the extent that he was a man in psychology, a man in general semantics, a man in communication theory, and a really interesting kind of a guy. He was like a dad to me. We traveled together when he in fact was on the road. A lot of times when I stayed at San Francisco State, I took over and did the lectures for him. I got to the point where I could even make the same intonations. You know how it is when you admire or idolize somebody, you kind of pick up some of the way of talking. So I could talk like Don Hayakawa, and I could say, well, Barry, the way you do it, and I ended up kind of even laughing at myself talking when I was hearing Don's voice coming through. But what I learned was this, that language plays an incredibly important role in human behavior. And by understanding the nuances of language and the rules of language, which are really not talked about a lot, about the role of reports, inferences, and judgments, what happens, and time binding, and all the other kind of wonderful things that you can find in Hayakawa's book, Language in Thought and Action, which is basically a kind of a simplified version of Science and Sanity, which was very difficult for a lot of people to read. But Don's book in 1941 became a Book of the Month Club selection. And that, of course, made it very, very wonderful for him, except that was Hayakawa, December 41, Pearl Harbor. Well, in fact, they shoved the book under the tables, and it didn't get sold very much, unfortunately for him. However, what did happen was that when it was dragged out and people started to read it, they realized that, in fact, this man had really a very, very good idea about the importance not of language, but of what it did to people in general, psychologically, physically, and how we ended up living our lives so much dependent on the role of language to us, with us, and within us, conscious and unconsciously. That's, of course, something that I got involved in. But Hayakawa, later, when I was at San Francisco State, I met him, and then I became his protege. That means I spent 5 years basically following, learning, and being around him, and meeting the people that he was around. Well, being a very important guy, he was around a lot of important people in psychology. Fritz Perls, Bill Pemberton, Dr. William Pemberton, Anatol Rappaport, Vivi Michvenia-Ratzik, just to name a couple of people that were there. And so in being around him, Carl Rogers, Anatol Rappaport, Abraham Maslow, just a number of people that were involved and interested, Wendell Johnson, people involved and interested in psychology, communication. These individuals shaped and influenced my life and the way I saw things so very deeply. Well, what happens is that as a result of that, I, of course, got more and more involved, not just in psychology, but in the role of language in human behavior. Well, that took me on a series of adventures that I'm still on to this moment. And I've learned and listened and watched so many of these wonderful giants in human behavior. Virginia Satir, for example, listening to people talk about the role of language. Listening, learning, and watching. And one of the things that they tell us most of all is that this is a learnable situation, that if we study general semantics and communication theory, we can do a lot to improve our plight and also to understand the role not just of language, but the role that we play in our lives with regard to language. So general semantics has been a very important factor in my life. Later, I got more involved in psychology, and in my role in psychology, I started to study both the conscious and the unconscious messages that we send, and that also is testable. So general semantics gave some very clear opinions and positions, which I've used, and I've also used it a lot in training intelligence officers, how to look at something. Do you know something? That one of the first books that an agent going into the Central Intelligence Agency is given is Language in Thought and Action. How do you like that? So the wonderful thing about human behavior and my psychology studies is it led me to a deeper and more profound respect for the information given to me by Professor S.I. Hayakawa and some of the things that he did. Years ago, at San Francisco State as an assistant to S.I. Hayakawa, I had an opportunity to hang out with him, and he loved racing around in cars, and I used to race sports cars at one point early in my life. And so at a moment, I was teaching Don how to race and how to go around corners. And in fact, I remember one time when we were in what we call a four-wheel controlled drift, car skidding sideways. I said, you know, you have to lay it down like this. He said, no, Barry, you have to know the difference between lay and lie. He said, if you ever want to call yourself an educated person, you have to know the difference between lay and lie. I couldn't believe that the car was skidding sideways and the guy was correcting my grammar. That was Hayakawa. But at a certain point, he lent me his car, which he used to do when he'd go off on lecture gigs. He lent me his TR2 Triumph, and so at a certain point, he and his son Alan and I rebuilt the Triumph, and we even got it painted red. So when we had it all set up and it was really nice, I was driving it, and all of a sudden the car burst into flame. I'm telling you, I felt like a kamikaze pilot. The flames were lapping up from the wheel wells, and it was really incredible. It was nighttime. I got the car to a stop, and the flames were just coming up all over. And I realized, oh my God, we've got two briefcases there of student papers. Well, if you've ever been a student, which I assume you have, you know what it's like to have your papers burned up. You know, it's like having your dog eat your papers, only the professor ate the papers. So what happened was that I raced in, you know, risked my life for the students and got the two briefcases out of there. Well, anyway, so later, of course, I called Marge Hayakawa, Don's wife, explained the situation. She called Don, who was then in a debate in front of 3,000 people, debating Marshall McLuhan. When the debate was over, he called me, really up and ebullient about what had happened and how he had, in quotes, beaten Marshall McLuhan. I explained the situation about the car. I was really, really worried. Imagine telling your dad you just burned his car up that he loved. Well, he said to me, don't worry about it, Barry. Just go out and select the best car you can find, Triumph you can find, for me, and I'll pay for it when I get back. I just made a lot of money on this lecture tour, so don't worry about it. So I went out and found a TR4A, which was the latest car with the latest extras, including electric overdrive. I got that car with the electric overdrive. Bottom line was that when he came back, I was racing towards the airport to pick him up, and oh my God, I forgot the red baseball cap. That burned up too. So I raced around Stonestown in San Francisco, and I found a store that was open because it was early morning, J. Briggs, and I raced it to the door, and I said, "Do you have any hats?" "Yeah," he said, "the only hat I've got is this Scottish hat." And I said, "Oh, I'll take it." And so I had this wonderful hat sitting on the seat next to me when I actually picked Don up, and he saw the new Triumph and he loved it. And I said, and by the way, I'm replacing the hat that was there with this one. Your red baseball cap is no more, it's ashes, but you can wear this. So he said, okay, I like it. So he wore that hat, and that became the hat that he was wearing some years later in 1969 when he was made acting president of San Francisco State College. He was wearing that hat when he saw some students at the corner of 19th and Holloway standing on a sound truck making all these outrageous remarks. He just jumped out in anger, and he got up and he ripped the wires out of the sound truck wearing this cap. And at a certain point, this picture flashed around the world, and of course everybody was upset about the demonstrations and the riots that were going on college campuses at that time. And so what happened was, here it was, Hayakawa wearing this hat. It became the symbol of defiance and standing up for certain kinds of values which a lot of people believed in. In fact, what happened was some people sent every United States senator a Tam O'Shanter as a symbol of defiance against behavior which is seen as unacceptable. Well, guess what? We might think about sending some of these hats out around now. So what happened was I had gotten Don that hat, and I was really kind of excited about it. Later, when I was going off to take a job at Trenton State College as vice president there for administration and finance, later to be changed innovative planning, I think is what we called it later. Hayakawa said to me, well, Barry, listen, you're going for this important job in Trenton, New Jersey. I'd like to give you something. So he then gave me this Tam O'Shanter. So I had this Tam O'Shanter as my symbol, which hung on the walls, and in fact they wrote about it naturally in the newspapers that this hat from Hayakawa was there. So I had this hat, and it was kind of a fun thing to have. So then the next thing that happened with regard to the Tam O'Shanter and Hayakawa and me was some years later. This is the kind of a mystery part, and I don't really understand it to this day. What happened was that Don passed away, and of course that was a big blow to me. I went to the funeral, and we had all the jazz, which he loved so much, and all the kind of celebration of his life and that kind of thing. I was living in San Francisco on Nob Hill, and I was about to move, and as I was starting to organize my stuff, I looked down and I saw a case there. I saw something there that I couldn't really explain. I saw a briefcase, and I looked at it, and I thought, well, where the heck does that come from? And so I looked at it again, and I turned it over. You see it's pretty dusty here. I turned it over, and written on the top here is S.I. Hayakawa. I really was just blown away, because I couldn't even remember when Don was over at the house last. And so I, of course, instantly opened it up. Nothing has changed. It's exactly the way it was. And what was in there was his language amendment, an envelope with his signature on the top, United States Senate, Hayakawa, and an old camera inside this. And inside this camera was a kind of an old failure of an idea. It was a rotary camera with all the kind of things that people could have, this round disc, and I took it down to a store, and they said they didn't even know how to develop that. Well, I said, figure it out. They did. And what they came up with was a few pictures there. And what was on these pictures were basically the last pictures that I ever saw of Don. And more than that, there was this Tam O'Shanter. So here was this Tam O'Shanter from Hayakawa. And there was a picture of Don wearing that Tam O'Shanter. So you can see this picture of Hayakawa wearing this Tam O'Shanter, and of course it was so exciting and so unexplainable to me that it always was kind of a mystery. And so when I have taken this and used this briefcase, which is not very often, by the way, because it's really old and I don't want anything to happen to it, when I've used it, it's been for important issues that relate to really major issues in negotiations and communication. I always think it's kind of fun to have Don's briefcase there. Anyway, Hayakawa and the messages of the Tam O'Shanter. What are those messages? I'll tell you what they are. Trust yourself, believe in yourself, stand strong, stand firm, stand clear. Don't take nonsense from people when you know they're wrong. Say what you feel. Be clear, be straightforward, be resolute. And it is in that sense that that little guy, beautifully dressed, strong in character, clear in position, and absolutely defiant against those values which he felt were wrong or inappropriate, he spoke up. I have 3 of those messages right there. They're displayed in my home in very, very important places where I never miss seeing them every day. So Don still lives in what we call in General Semantics time binding. That is a message sent from the past that continues to be a message now that influences our behavior now, like books do. But this is my time binding message from Dr. S.I. Hayakawa, Don Hayakawa. Don got the message.